Okay, I'm ready to start. Technical difficulties have been resolved. Round is being recorded. Let's go.
All right, sounds good. Everyone's good? Okay, I'm gonna take that as a yes. All right, my time starts now. Hello, Judge. My name is Ben Yonker, and I strongly urge an affirmation vote on the resolution that college admissions should not factor in the development of charity organizations by high school students. Let's move on into some quick top of case and resolutional analysis. We see this as a value round, given the word should in the resolution and without the implementation of specific policy action. This means that you're going to be evaluating this round from the lens of utility, with a value of utilitarianism and a value criterion of equity, specifically looking at equity for college in terms of college admissions and underserved communities at large. So not just college admissions, but also these underserved communities. We also see that we're going to define charities as nonprofits or nonprofit-like organizations. So specifically looking at the legal structure of nonprofits and also like the similar forms of. Now into some quick resolution analysis, explaining to you what this resolution means in the context of this debate and also how we're going to win this resolution. We see that with an increasing trend of starting nonprofits in high school, we see an increasing trend of starting nonprofits for high school, or nonprofits in high school for specifically with the express purpose of getting into college by being beneficial for college admissions. We also see that these nonprofits and charity organizations are generally abandoned before college, both because of geographical considerations and better priorities and stuff to do with your time. This is incredibly problematic, which I'll get into in a second, but that's kind of the gist of why this is a debate. We also see that this doesn't mean, in terms of the resolution, this doesn't mean that you wouldn't be able to start one. Rather, we're telling you that college admissions shouldn't be looking at you starting a nonprofit as a determination for whether or not you get into college. With this, it means that participation in community service and volunteering still counts in terms of college admissions, just not developing a new charity organization. Onto the thesis of the case. We are only weeding out students who are doing nonprofits just for college admissions. This means they won't be fully committed and won't make a real impact. We aren't filtering out people who really want to make a change and are actively going to make a difference in their community. Onto our first advantage, and that is inequalities in admissions. Right now, we see that starting a nonprofit takes an extreme amount of time and resources. We see that legal fees at the state level to create a nonprofit are up to $10,000. It is inaccessible to all but the top 1% to register a nonprofit. We also see that recent trends indicate more and more students are creating a nonprofit to buy their way into schools. We also see that aside from this, if you're in a poor community, it is extraordinarily difficult to raise the donations necessary to have a nonprofit with any degree of impact. This probably means this is inherently inaccessible, even if you are not going through the official government rounds of trying to register a nonprofit to get around to get around the immense taxes. Let's look at specifically how colleges are not factoring admissions would change this. We see that significant inequalities in the admissions process. We don't claim to solve all of them, but we do reduce them, and that is fundamentally the thesis of this advantage, that we are reducing the chance that rich kids are able to buy their way into, and poor kids can't spend $10,000 on this. They don't have the means. They don't live in a community in which they can raise the necessary donations to go to these nonprofits. With this, let's look at the impacts of this argument. We see that one is the wealth gap. The average person with a degree earns more. Generational income inequality, in part, is caused by college admissions selecting wealthy kids over poor children. We see that this is really important because rich kids buying their way in takes more qualified lower income kids, thus meaning that the poverty cycle continues and it doesn't stop. Let's move on to
Do you think that people, especially lower income people, can create charities without registering them and thus circumvent the fee?
There's a couple important considerations to that. One is that there's a really one you can't you don't have any ability for any solvency in terms of the nonprofit capabilities. Like you can't go out into the community and have the same benefit because all of your donations are taxed to an immense degree because you would have to register as a corporation in order to have the same level of impact. And we also see that it's simply not feasible. And also you couldn't display it on your college application as a charity organization. It would be a corporation corporation. Thus, you would have for-profit incentives, meaning that it's like not at all applicable to this resolution. It functionally means that like nonprofits are the only means in which this could, they are the only kind of organization that can exist under the scope of this resolution. Let's move on to the second advantage, and that is unsustainable nonprofits. Onto a quick background. We see that with this trend of nonprofits being abandoned comes a huge cost to the community they're in, right? For example, if you were suddenly starting to like make progress by like creating a nonprofit that like distributes like meals or like does community service to try and like restore bikes, suddenly when this nonprofit is dissolved because you go to college, suddenly this access is terminated, right? These people no longer have the access to these services. We also see that secondly, alternatively, if there's not a successful, like for example, if this nonprofit terminates and there's no substantial impact to the community, it probably means this nonprofit wasn't successful in the first place, and thus removing it from the community and thus removing it from the community in the first place won't do any substantial damage, right? So you have this double bind of either A, the nonprofit doesn't do anything, and therefore there's no reason why we shouldn't be disincentivizing it for the sake of increasing accessibility in college admissions, or if the nonprofit actually does something, it probably means that the fact that pulling the nonprofit out does substantially more harm than the nonprofit not existing in the first place. And that is fundamentally because of the presence of alternative nonprofits, and that because of the idea of competition in the nonprofit space. We see that nonprofits by high schoolers lack the necessary long and concerted effort to do real change, which often creates substantial problems for the communities that they operate within. Competing with more established nonprofits that have proven profit success is what's going to happen when these high school nonprofits are created. Parents are more likely to donate to a friend's or a family's nonprofit than a big nonprofit with a proven track record, simply because of the familial connection. We also see that 1/3 of established organizations are not likely to survive the pandemic recession, so now is key to solving this change. And finally, we see that a research study wrote that abandoning does more harm than good for low-income and marginalized communities if the nonprofit never existed in the first place. Social safety nets are revoked if some include the net in their plans. It is now ruined. So thus, I strongly urge an affirmation ballot. Thank you.
Sorry, let me just grab water really quick. Okay, yeah, I'll also take verbal POIs. I use she, her pronouns. Quick off time roadmap, I'm going to go on our own case and then on gov case. And if anybody's not ready, then I will begin my time.
Quick question. Sheets? How many sheets do I need?
We have 2 contentions. I don't know how exactly you want to flow that.
Yeah, thank you.
If everybody is ready, then I will begin my time. Now, agreed with our framework of net benefits, we're not only going to focus on the equity point of net benefits as well, though we have like other impacts that we can probably also follow under this framework of net benefits that I'm going to get into more when I get into our case. First contention is just the good of creating nonprofits and charities. We tell you that having this factored into college admissions will be creating more nonprofits than there would be otherwise. You're reaching a big demographic that otherwise probably wouldn't have time or interest in being this super active in communities. Tell you that high school students are taught that activism and politics can't really be changed by students, like by society, like they can't vote, et cetera, et cetera. They feel like they don't have a voice. And without this being factored into college admissions, they'd probably just continue that and not start nonprofits and things like that. They also likely wouldn't like feel like they have the time, but when it's so important for college admissions, they will make the time that they otherwise wouldn't have. We are actively creating more by students that they don't have on their side. We think that this has a couple of different impacts. First subpoint is seeing and fixing problems in the status quo. We tell you that it's likely that students and people within communities have a closer understanding of what is happening, right? One, they grew up there and have relationships with the people that live there, and also have a vested interest in seeing it fixed because they probably like have family in those places or have family living nearby that they want to benefit from the things that they want to fix with their nonprofits. They also have even more of an interest in this succeeding to look good to colleges. We tell you that people probably want to get into a good college, name brand, opportunity it provides you for all of those reasons, like they want to get into a good college. We also think that when they know that charity helps you, top achieving students are probably going to want to do it, or even slightly less high achieving students who want to be seen by colleges. It looks better if you have something to show for your charity and actually getting work done in the community rather than than you just had the idea. Thus, they have a vested interest in making it succeed or do actual some sort of change in the community because they want to look good to colleges. We also tell you that young minds on issues are probably really good because it adds a new perspective that otherwise often feels like they don't have a voice. Many organizations are run by older people who have ideas that like maybe aren't as modern or like aren't as influenced by like the new like youth who feel like they don't have much a voice in politics. Tell you that young people should have more of a voice in society. They're the ones who are going to live in the society in the future, and therefore it's better if they're the ones like influencing it and they're the ones making change. We also think that generally just more people doing charity is good because they can volunteer and literally go into communities and help people. We think this is probably a net positive. Secondly is collaboration on ideas. We think that getting together and discussing ways to help the community will foster discussions about what kinds of things certain communities need most if they have a reason to want to start this. Without this being part of admissions, it's likely that high school students wouldn't be involved or reach out, and we think this like adds to more community togetherness and betterment. Thirdly, we tell you that on government colleges will probably put too much emphasis on grades and things like that, which impacts to A, students not having the time to like help the community and stuff, bad mental health, but also thinking that it's all that matters. We think that what we are doing is giving them life skills, and to A, the importance of activism in the future as well. When you teach them how to run nonprofits or they learn how to run nonprofits at like a younger age, they're more likely to know how to do it in the future and do it in the future, but also just how to like organize and run a company. We think these are like positive life skills that things like doing really well in a math class don't actually teach you. This is probably going to have better effects for all of the students that are participating in these nonprofits. Than it would when they're like super hyper focused on grades and things like that. Second contention is general emphasis on helping the community. We tell you that even if you can't start an organization, this essentially shapes college admissions to be more multifaceted. Why? Colleges are now looking for stuff in your application that proves you're like a quote unquote good person, right? So even if you haven't started an organization, this does place emphasis on giving back to the community, and people are rewarded for that as well because it goes along with what colleges are already valuing, proving that you are a good person to your community. I think this is probably a really good thing to emphasize, right? Rewarding people for moral behavior. This means that people who have experience in charity, even just volunteering and like write their essay about a volunteer problem that they did, which we think is accessible to like anybody in this space, are getting into good universities and getting a good education. We think that these well-educated people who obviously care somewhat about charities because they put effort into starting one are going out into society. They probably also know the benefits of charity from their time doing it, probably saw firsthand how their actions can help people, which is good because when you feel like you're making an impact, it makes you feel important, it makes you feel good, it makes you more likely to want to do it in the future. They're also more likely to return to charity in their adult life when they are like their nonprofits either like making money or when they get a good job like later in life and give more money to charity in the future or work at a nonprofit or something in the future because they saw the effects of their actions. It's also creating a culture of giving at this college, and college activism is more likely, and college values are way more likely to be like wholesome and less toxic emphasis on just grades when you have an emphasis on charity. The other point under this is the alternative on gov, right? We think that if we stop placing emphasis on charity, we end up placing way more emphasis on other things. What is other things? Test scores, grades, extracurriculars. Of all these things, we think that community service and founding charities is probably the least subjective and most equal opportunity. We think that charity organization, while like not every student may have the funds to start a nonprofit, once again, this is placing more of an emphasis on like the well-roundedness of a college organization. We think that like even volunteering and writing your essay about that will help you get into a college even if you can't start it. We also think that there are way other factors that colleges find more important than starting a charity organization, and the people that are starting these charity organizations are going to be doing it to get a leg up. It's not the sole factor that's getting you into college, right? Even starting a club that like organizes a food drive technically like counts as charity, right? Like a book drive, bake sale, volunteer tutoring, babysitting, all of these when run by a group of people can like be like sort of this giving back to community, these values that we're perpetuating. We also think that the primary thing you need to start a charity organization is time and like volunteers and dedication. And we think that this is unique to charity. While test scores and grades and essays are easily inflated by money, you can pay for a tutor, you can pay for help, and in some cases, like college admissions scandal, you can literally pay to get in. We think that this is the like root problem of the inequity my opponents talk about, and not the fact that charity organizations are being found. They don't actually get their impacts of fixing this because all of the things I just listed still exist on their side and are the real problem in like getting in. Charity is way more of an equal footing and more people have the like opportunity to do it. Going on to my opponent's case, their first contention is admissions. We tell you that A, this is creating significant societal pressure on doing good things for the communities and made colleges focus on being good people, which has unintentional consequences of making like a public declaration saying we are no longer taking into account of founding a charity. If colleges make this public declaration, it shows that they no longer care about this sort of value and stops a lot of students from like wanting to volunteer and stuff in high school. It's also easier to crowdfund your nonprofit starting salary than like crowdfund your SAT tutoring. right? People value fixing the larger community over helping an individual. You can outsource money you need, reach out to people, raise money in and outside of your communities, and like GoFundMe's and things like that. We tell you that there are scholarships and grants you can get to start a corporation, and many rich people want to get involved in like starting nonprofits, but they don't actually want to do the work themselves. And they also like find high school kids probably endearing, and the fact that they are being activists, they're going to find endearing. And this will probably want to fund it if you can find a rich person that cares about the value that you are perpetuating. We think that there are many ways to like get this like starting funding, especially when we create this culture of this happening. Like there's going to be more scholarships and grants that are available to high school students wanting to start it as well. We also tell you that there are other factors. I brought this up maybe in 1 second, but we tell you that once again, this charity thing is not the reason that there's inequity in college admissions. It's because of people paying for tutors and things like that. They're not fixing the root issue at all, and won't actually get any of their impacts about fixing inequity. Once again, this is like not the most valued thing in college admissions. I'm sorry, I'm in protected time, so I can't take your POI. Second contention is that it's unsustainable. We tell you that they don't have any warranting as to why people quit, and we tell you this not true for a couple reasons. First is that people feel pressure to continue. They see people using their services and would feel guilty for taking them away. Also, it's going to have somewhat of an effect in the community if you buy their warranting that there are like two cases, one where it has an effect. In the case where it has an effect, we think that like the community is going to see this as a valuable thing, and somebody in that community is likely to continue it, even if the college student themselves doesn't, even though they probably will want to because they feel good about themselves when they do it. Even if you don't buy what they're saying about all of this, we think that like even if it wasn't successful, it creates the want to help society and teaches them to do it in the future. So like even if the nonprofit doesn't have an effect to them, they're more likely to do it again in the future, even if it doesn't have the effects while the student is like practically in college at that time. Also, they talk about like the pandemic recession. We tell you that that's like mostly over now. We're in the current status quo, not in like when COVID first started. But we also generally think that they will have a vested interest in continuing it, and if they don't, somebody else will. And for all these reasons, I strongly urge a off ballot. Thank you.
All right, order is app case, then neg case in order. So like verbal POIs, give me a few seconds to organize my flow and get a timer. I'm just gonna start topic case A1, A2, DA1, DA2 in that order. So is everybody good? Okay. Time starts in 3, 2, 1. First, go on to topic case. The main thing you're going to be extending on topic case are definition of charity as a nonprofit. Our opponents can see this, which means you're going to bind this round that charity is not like a bake sale in a shop. It has to be an actual like nonprofit that is legally declared as a nonprofit. This means that we still get access to all of our arguments about like legal access, about how much money it costs to start a nonprofit. This is really, really key. Go on to the first advantage of admissions. First, on uniqueness, our opponents argue that like it's good societal pressure, and like there's a public declaration that like colleges do not care about like community service and doing good. This is incorrect. The fundamental argument we're going to be making here is that we are still allowing colleges to look at like people volunteering. We're still allowing colleges to look at people doing community service. We're just having colleges not look at people who are rich enough to start a nonprofit, which costs $10,000, like our opponents concede. The next argument they make is like people can outsource things. They can get funding from other ways. They can get scholarship. We tell you that like outsourcing and getting funding from other things is only really an option in a rich community. Again, if you're in a poor, struggling community, your community members do not have enough money to give you outsourcing money. You do not have enough money to give you to like help you with the GoFundMe. Only rich communities can give you that. There is not enough capital in these poorer communities to do this, which is the reason for these inequities in the ability to create a nonprofit in the first place. Number two, they are go on to the links. They argue that like the real problem here is like people paying for tutors or other like areas of inequalities. We completely agree that there are other areas of inequalities. We literally tell you that we're not solving for all inequities, but we are doing good. We are going in the right direction. Our opponents concede that it costs literally $10,000 to make the legal fees in order to make a nonprofit. $10,000 is utterly inaccessible for anybody but the top like 0.1%, which proves that if this is a substantial amount of college admissions, then it is inherently inaccessible to the poor and inherently a way for the rich to buy themselves directly into college. On impact, you're going to be extending the impact specifically on the poverty cycle.
You need this $10,000 before you can.
Number two, you need the $10,000 before you can actually start the GoFundMe, because you need to do this for legal fees in the first place. So it's not about like raising money for the nonprofit for donations. It's about like you need money to make the thing in the first place. Nobody's going to give you $10,000 for legal fees in a poor community, which is the reason as to why it's the reason why it's inaccessible. Again, on impacts, extend the poverty cycle impact. We may not solve for all of inequalities, but we certainly do good in the right direction, which means you're still going to be voting that we do a net positive thing on the affirmative case. Go on to A2. Okay, there are argument okay. So this is advantages about unsustainable nonprofits. Our opponent's first argument here is that like people are going to feel like pressured and guilty for abandoning their nonprofits. Judge, the whole point of our argument here is that these people do not actually care about doing good. They're only doing this to get into college. This is proven because if the reason that they're actually going to start a nonprofit is because of getting into college, they do not actually want to do good. Again, if they want to do good for their community, that's perfectly fine. They can do that separate from getting into college. But if getting into college is their motivation for doing good, once they get into Stanford, once they get into Harvard, why would they do this anymore? And this is the trend that we see significantly. Again, this is proven empirically. When people get into college, they abandon their nonprofits, which does a significant amount of harm to the community. So no, this is not actually going to happen. Their second argument here is about someone else is going to continue. This doesn't make any sense. We do not see this happening logically. Again, we have all these examples of when people get into colleges, they abandon their nonprofits. No one else makes the same nonprofit because of competition. They can see the argument here about competition. What they're directly doing is destroying other nonprofits because of a nonprofit they're going to abandon, which means that overall the amount of good being done in the community is going to go down.
They don't contest it's happening now, which probably means on the risk that we have solvency.
They do not contest that it's happening now, which probably means on the risk that we have solvency, you're going to be voting for the affirmative anyway. Okay, they can see the rest. They can see a lot of the rest of the things. You can probably extend the impact, specifically what we tell you about the actual good that's going to be done. We both agree on the net benefits framing. So if we can prove to you that people abandoning their nonprofits are more net harm, which we have, we are going to be winning this round. Okay, go on to the aff case in order. So their first contention, or actually first on topic case, they argue that net benefits globally, sure, that's fine. Go on to C1 about good good nonprofits. They argue that activism cannot be taught and people still need to be encouraged to do activism. We tell you that you can still join a nonprofit, and B, colleges can still look at you joining a nonprofit and volunteering in a charity as a good thing. All we are doing is saying that, look at the wording of the resolution. The wording of the resolution is college admission should not factor in the development of charity organizations. So that does not mean you can't participate in a charity organization. That does not mean you can't volunteer. All this means is that if you develop an organization, it is no different than just participating in an organization, which roots out people who are only doing this for the college admissions. So again, people can still join. We agree. Activism is really good, which is why we still encourage people to volunteer at their local charity, to volunteer at the already existing charities, because we think that's a really good thing to do. Onto their impacts. The first impact is about fixing problems. They argue that students have a more vested interest in the location. People are going to do more good. We tell you that once again, you can look to the competition on our second contention that is dropped by our opponents. The argument here is that they displace the already existing nonprofits that are doing a lot of good in the community right now for a nonprofit that is just going to get abandoned after they get into college, which means that regardless of whether or not a young minds are good, it actually makes it significantly worse because the already existing nonprofits are getting displaced, getting less donations, and then eventually everything collapses after the people who are making these only for college admissions get into college and then go away. Okay, their next argument here is on too much emphasis on grades and stuff like that. They argue that you should instead be prioritizing life skills. We agree. We're not only placing emphasis on grades. Again, you can still join a charity organization. You can still volunteer at your local nonprofit. That is still going to be considered in college admissions. It's just creating your own nonprofit is not going to be considered any differently. It's probably a link into accessibility. Once again, you should not only be evaluating whether somebody is rich enough to build a nonprofit. If somebody is able to go volunteer a nonprofit, that does just as much good for the community as a rich kid who's able to buy their way into building a nonprofit. I guess that's the second event. Okay, go on to their second contention about emphasis on common good. First, their argumentation is that people who are they once again argue about good people who exist. We agree, good people exist. Volunteering is something you can definitely do. Good people who actually want to build these nonprofits will do it regardless of whether they get into college or not. Again, if you see a problem in your community and you truly want to fix that problem, it should not be predicated on you getting into college for doing it, because you are doing an actually good action, which means that in this situation, people who actually want to do good are going to do it anyway because they do not care about getting into college. They actually want to help out their community, and that means that this is still going to happen. Good people still exist. Good people are still going to go volunteer. Good people may even start their own nonprofits if they have the amount of money to do so. We are saying it should not be factored in directly to college admissions. Okay. The next argument they make is about like emphasis on test scores and stuff like that, about how we are going to be forcing people to only look at test scores. That is absolutely not true. We are removing one small subset of extracurriculars that are used by rich kids to buy their way into schools. We're not removing any other extracurriculars. We're not removing any other forms of volunteering. All we're doing is removing the single thing. We're not only going to be focusing on test scores. Okay. The final argument that they make here is that like people need is like more about time than money. A, they can see that it is about money as well because you need $10,000 to even start this. But B, the argument here is that poor people, like a significant amount of low-income people, do not have the time to work on it. Do not have the time to build their own. Do not have the time to build their own nonprofit. Again, it takes a significant amount of time and resources, which a lot of people in the low-income community do not have. Which is fundamentally the reason why this is directly leading to inaccessibilities and why we need to stop factoring this into college admissions. So thank you, and because we have proven to you that that like the affirmative is like a tangibly good action and goes into net benefits, we would a strong vote for the app.
Okay. Just before I start, last round I had some problems hearing POIs and stuff. So if I don't like when I finish my sentence say something, if that's like, I'll take your POI in a second or just acknowledge you that I didn't hear you and you can just repeat yourself. Okay. For the off time flow, I'm just going to go gov case, then op case. Yeah, should be pretty easy to follow.
Wait, it's the same order that I read it, right, in my speech? Or just top down?
Yeah, just gov down, exactly. Okay. I'll start my time. Now, so starting on government's first contention, where they tell you this is uniquely leading to inequity because only certain people can pay for this, I'm just going to give you a list of reasons why this is not true, in addition to what my partner has already told you. So first of all, we tell you this is creating significant societal pressure on people to do good things for communities. They give you a lot of warranting as to why, like, the only thing that this is disincentivizing now is starting your own nonprofit, and that people are still valuing like participation in nonprofits, etc. We just don't think this is true. We think there are a lot of unintentional consequences with making the public statement, we are no longer putting emphasis on X thing in admissions anymore. We think like even if the intention is to still put value on service, perception is more important than reality because and here's how it's going to be perceived. Admissions readers perceive it as service being less important because this one part of service is like no longer a quality that you can use in your application. So they're going to place less important on it in its evaluation. Just practically, we think this is true. But more importantly, we see that kids aren't going to see concrete benefits to volunteering. Kids are going to see this and be like, oh, they're no longer rewarding me for my efforts in volunteering and stuff like that. Not only is this going to make kids who have spent their entire life trying to do this to get into college really upset because they feel like they aren't going to do it, and actually more likely to quit. So if you buy all their impacts about short-term nonprofits being bad, like this is happening under their side as a part of the backlash to passing this contention. But furthermore, we tell you that like the kids are probably just going to stop doing volunteering altogether because it might be like, oh, this isn't helping me in college admissions anymore. We tell you they're going to have a hard time like differentiating between founding a nonprofit and like what exactly is a nonprofit. Does it include bake sales and things like that? I'll take it in a second. We tell you that they're going to have all the same questions that we have, and thus they're probably just likely to stop it altogether. If they see that colleges are now putting more emphasis on SAT scores and grades, they're just going to put more of their time in that. Like high school students don't have unlimited amounts of time, and they're going to try to do what they think will maximize the impacts of like what colleges they get into. We think this is going to lead to net less volunteering, and obviously this is going to lead to net less participation in the founding of nonprofits. We give you all the impacts as to why this is net bad in our own case. Refer back to that. Sure, I'll take your POI now.
Yeah, why won't people who like actually want to do good in their community still volunteer?
First of all, we tell you that there really aren't this many of these like unicorns in society. We tell you that high school students generally, like they have priorities that most high school students probably are just like, I need to get into college, like later in life, I'll probably do something good. I'm just not worried about it in the status quo. And second of all, we tell you that just most people are self-interested. Most people act in the way that they think will benefit them because they can feel their happiness more directly than they can feel the happiness that they get from like volunteering and stuff like that. We think when you don't have an incentive, it's just empirically true, you're going to have less people. Even if you have like the rare few unicorns who are still like, I'm so dedicated to my volunteering service, we just think you're going to have way less of the people actually volunteering. In a round of utilitarian benefits, we don't really care. Like the magnitude of the volunteering is what's really important here. The second point they tell you is like the unaffordability of starting a grant. My partner gives you warranting, which is never responded to, which is that you can outsource the like funding of this $10,000 thing, which by the way, I have no idea if that's true. Like I can't research in round, so I don't know how much it costs to start a nonprofit. But like we tell you can outsource this. They say like in poor communities, you aren't going to be able to do this. You can obviously do that online, like things like GoFundMe, all this sorts of things means you can literally mail the bill to a rich community and just say, please help me. You're going to get tax cuts, and they are going to do it. Or we think they are likely to do do it because we think it looks good. Again, like my partner told you, they think it's going to be endearing. All these reasons we think never responded to, and just means that on net, some people are going to be able, even if not everyone can do it. And we think like more volunteering is good. Again, there's the point of like this not fixing inequity in total. I'm going to go into why like the government is uniquely increasing inequity once I go into our own case. Their second contention is this is unsustainable. First of all, we tell you they don't have any warranting as to why people will quit. We tell you this is not true for two reasons. One, we think that people will feel the pressure to continue. They see people using the services that they are provided and would feel guilty for passing them away. The second reason we think this is not true is that we think like if the beginning incentive, even if the beginning incentive is to like get into college, we think eventually people are just going to feel like really rewarded by this opportunity. And so long as we don't pass anything saying like, oh my gosh, you're not going to, doesn't affect your college admissions at all anymore, we think people still like will get the chance to grow, love participating in their community, make friends in the program that they're starting. All these things we think mean that they are more long-term than the government suggests. Even if you don't buy what I say, we think it's going to be worse if it stops. One, because the short-term impacts of these services is really important, i.e. if you tutor 5 kids and not 10 kids, at least the 5 kids you tutored have been brought up to grade level and whatever and have a greater chance of succeeding in life. And two, they tell you that this means like the government is less likely to participate or something like that. We don't think nonprofits like relieve the government's burden of helping people out with things like this. Even if you don't buy like literally anything that we say, we're still giving people a leg up. They still go to good colleges, they make more money, and they're going to give back in the long run. That's these people who are participating, who are starting nonprofits. And these are the people who might even help like with those $10,000 donations in the future. We think we want people who are giving charity to be rewarded by getting into these good schools. And we think like the system and the status quo in which we're simply rewarding people who have the most money to pay for an SAT tutor is like completely not ideal. So if we're weighing two not ideal situations, we prefer the one that places more on the like moral action of giving back to your community through like hardcore rewarding, even if like that's not quote unquote rewarding good people. It's rewarding good people along with people who do it for, you know, selfish reasons. Moving onward, we tell you that they say that they've proven empirically that this is true. I've, again, never seen this statistic, but I do know, for example, like at our school, there are students who have started clubs and nonprofits, things like that, which are intended to help the community, and they continue it. And one of the reasons why they're able to continue it is because other people want leadership in these sorts of clubs and opportunities so they can put them on their college applications. This is a self-fulfilling cycle. We don't think people are just going to give up. Like, there are people that they've been training under them. Even if you don't buy that, like all the warranting I give you about why they still care, there are other people who want that title for purely selfish reasons who will be able to carry on this nonprofit. Moving on to the opposition case. First of all, we tell you that just like charity is good. Again, I brought up the perception versus reality point. Colleges are just going to place less value on volunteering, and students are going to volunteer less when they feel like they weren't being rewarded for their actions. Moving on, we tell you that like taking away charity makes it more, taking away charity as like a way to evaluate college admissions leads to inherent more inequity in the system, because that means you are inherently placing more value on these scores. We think that's bad. Like, let's do the two worlds comparison here. On a world where all you're evaluating is like really test scores, and on the opposition side where we're evaluating test scores and charity, if you buy that there's any potential that someone not rich can start a charity, that's better on op. And even if you think that only rich people can start charities, we still think that's fine on op, because they're starting charities. Presumably they have the money to start the charity, which means they have the money to like give into these people to help lift poor people out of these economic situations, which we think in the long run we think will help break the cycle of poverty for all these people. Like, we don't think they grapple with the inherent good that charity does for society, that it improves people in general and just leads to net utilitarian impacts, which obviously framework for this round. Moving on to our second contention, which is that there's a general emphasis on helping the community. They tell you that good people exist. We tell you, again, these good people are rare. Most people only do things if it directly helps them. Also, just note, like, empirically speaking, we tell you that colleges place more emphasis on like leadership or like starting a club than just participating in a club. So that means, like, in the status quo, they're going to place more value on you being like the captain of the debate team than participating in the debate team, which again is just another reason as to why they aren't looking anymore in like the leadership section for your volunteer service, that is just going to fall to the bottom of the list below things like captain of the track team. We think that inherently means they're placing less value on community service. For all these reasons, I strongly encourage an opposition ballot. Thank you.
Okay. Obviously, POs can be verbal as well. And this is going to be completely off flow, so I would just flow it on a complete separate piece of paper. It's just going to be weighing under clashes and like 2 framing mechanisms. If everybody is ready, then I will begin my time. Now, I'm going to weigh under 2 separate framing mechanisms. The first is if you believe our point about like creating an emphasis on general volunteering and things like that, and then even if you don't, right? So I'm going to tell you why that framing is true, tell you why we went under that, and then even if you don't believe that, I'm going to tell you why we still win this debate, right? So we tell you that in the government worlds, there probably won't be a value on volunteering and stuff and things that make you like a quote unquote good person in a college's eyes, or focus on like benefiting your community and things like that. We think this happens for a couple of reasons. First is perception over reality, right? We think that when colleges make a public statement saying we no longer value students starting charities, no matter what that actually means empirically, people are going to perceive that as we no longer care about students like participating or doing anything in charities, because that is what they are going to see when they see like charities and things like that. They're not going to read into the fine print of like, oh, the rich people that are starting nonprofits. We think this perception is going to cause students to not put as much focus on volunteering and things like that. Kids also won't see concrete benefits on volunteering if colleges don't like mechanize it for them. They're going to see see my opponent's own impacts about short-term nonprofits, because they're probably going to abandon them if they no longer think that it's like important, right? So we tell you that this also happens in their world. If you have kids that have already started nonprofits and then we stop valuing this, all of those are going away, right? But also that they don't have an emphasis on being a good person anymore, and thus they won't do it. We tell you that what's happening on our world is you're creating a culture of it. A student's thought process is going to be, okay, colleges like when I create charities, but I don't have time or money to do this. What should I do instead? Maybe I should volunteer, because then I can write my essay about it and still get those benefits, even though I couldn't like pay my way into it, right? They don't have this analysis on their side. We tell you about this culture. We give you warnings for why it happens. We also give you warning as to why it won't happen on their side, which is that kids probably don't have time and have other priorities. If you buy this point about emphasis on volunteering being a unique thing on op, we win under the following clashes, right? First is inequity. We think we fix for this why. The alternative is a super hard emphasis on grades, which is way more inequitable, right? We tell you that when you have a super hard emphasis on grades, the thing that is causing inequity in the college like admission system is like emphasis on SAT scores and things like that, which is so easy to pay your way into. What happens with nonprofits or even volunteering is if you buy that we can like create a culture of volunteering, then students can do things like that, which is like way more accessible to anybody. Anybody can walk into like a soup kitchen and volunteer there. But also the crowdsourcing of nonprofits, they tell you that like only rich people have access to that, but then don't actually mechanize it. We think like in the world of social media and GoFundMe's and things like that, or like promoting yourself on TikTok, whatever it is, it's so easy for like a high school student that, as we tell you, people probably find like somewhat endearing, to like get money for a nonprofit, especially if it's a generally good idea, or they can prove to you that there's a problem in their community that they are going to fix. We think people have like a certain moral code that they're going to care about, and thus want to fund it even if it's not their own child, right? We think that this fixes for a lot of inequity, and they tell you like, oh, it doesn't happen, and it happens before they actually start the company. We think this is fine. You can promote your company before it exists and get the starting cost of it. Even if you somehow don't buy like anything I just told you about creating a culture of volunteering, creating more good people, and fixing for a lot of college inequity, we tell you we still win for a couple of reasons, right? First of all, my opponents aren't fixing for any inequity. They still have all of the inequities they tell you exist. And since they themselves argue that this is a small subset of the college admissions process, changing this isn't actually going to change major inequities and the problem. They don't actually get those impacts. Also, on the opposition side, we are empirically creating more nonprofits, right? If high school students essentially do not like have the opportunity or do not think it's important to create nonprofits, they won't. Even if they are funded by rich kids, they are still existing, and we think this is good. This doesn't happen on their side when kids don't have time or feel like they don't have a voice. No, we tell you why kid-run nonprofits are probably better. Like 99% of our warranting on this has not been responded to. We tell you that we think they likely won't be abandoned as well. They say it's empirically untrue that we say this, but we tell you and give you warranting as to why it probably is true. They're going to feel good. Somebody else probably will. And even if we teach them how to do this and how to fund these companies, so therefore they are more likely to in the future. And it's showing kids that they can have a voice in things, even if it's not nonprofits. We show them that they like have some sort of activism. People with money are still making nonprofits, which is literally helping people get out of poverty, right? Like weigh this, it's super important. We are creating nonprofits. We are helping with inequity in that way by literally helping people get out of poverty by these nonprofits that likely won't get abandoned. And for all of these reasons, I strongly urge an opposition.
Okay, quick overview for the speech. Okay, everyone hear me all right? I've been having some audio issues. Okay, perfect. Quick overview for the speech. You probably want to flow in a new sheet, because I'll be jumping around a little bit and doing a lot of weighing arguments. So, yeah. Is everyone good? I'm assuming so. Okay. All right. Yeah, in terms of like if you actually do want to flow, not on any sheet, I'll probably be starting with the F and then moving on to like more neg arguments. So we're doing a lot of cross applying. So yeah, I would suggest in the sheet. Okay. My time starts now. Hello, my name is Ben York, and I strongly urge an affirmation vote on the resolution that that college admissions should not factor in the development of charity organizations by high school students. Let's move into specifically why we're winning this debate and outline the key issues as to why you're going to be voting for the affirmation in today's debate. A couple quick things on the first advantage. The first being that one, they talk about how like outsourcing funding is possible. They first off, cross-apply their own unicorn analysis about how no, it's literally not possible. People who are motivated by doing good simply don't exist. Probably means you default to the assumption that nepotism and like friends and family are the only plausible form of donation. Secondly, extend the fact that you need like registration money to tell others that you have a nonprofit. Like you need this initial $10,000 before you can start saying that like I have a registered nonprofit in which you can donate to. People are probably going to be pretty hesitant to donate to like this unofficial thing for the seed money. And finally, extend the fact that like it's still easier for rich people, right? If they have the connections, they don't have to like do this extensive amount of outreach and necessary, which probably means that even if it's not complete solvency, it probably is pretty substantial solvency, which is the specific analysis we provide on the under the underview of this. On the second advantage, Judge, this advantage is really, really key. And the specific point about how you are displacing other established nonprofits is why we're winning this debate. If you're confused on where to vote, this is where you're going to vote. We are telling you that established nonprofits will lose money, will lose funding by the creation of these nonprofits. That is what's happening in the status quo, which probably means that the fact that the negation doesn't provide an outline as to how this problem is going to be fixed in the solution. They concede this argument. It probably means this problem is going to continue unless college admissions stop factoring in this issue. Yeah, we both agree that giving more money to established nonprofits is good. We're the only side that attempts to increase this and not decrease this money. We specifically tell you that established nonprofits are really, really key because they provide the stability that is necessary that these high school nonprofits simply do not provide. This is really, really important for low-income communities and probably outweighs above a lot of the specific offense that the negation reads about how a lot of the defense arguments about how like people are still like people will continue these nonprofits, like various things about why like these high school nonprofits won't shut down. Fundamentally, even if these high school nonprofits are not shutting down, it's still better to have these established nonprofits. This analysis gets conceded. Also, in terms of like people shutting down nonprofits, their basically only response is that look, people are suddenly going to think their nonprofit is good. Judge, if they really like start thinking their nonprofit is good, this nonprofit would exist from the get-go. You wouldn't need this college admissions to incentivize people to create the nonprofits. That's kind of the thesis to a lot of the neg case. Onto neg case, again, the thesis is, as I just said, what's really, really important here is that if these nonprofits are only created for the selfish motivations of college admissions, it probably means they're not sustainable. The important points that our opponents bring up is one, that leadership is still possible. Yes, leadership is still possible in clubs. They also, all their examples are specific to clubs. It probably means that like this is still possible. And two, volunteering is still going to be a thing. Onto the perception arguments that they bring up in response to our case. Don't buy the perception arguments. We only say no creating nonprofits. It's pretty obvious that volunteering is still allowed. No one in this round is confused. We are all students applying to college. If you increase volunteering, we also see that that this will actually lead to increased volunteering, right? Because people are consolidated instead of like a wide variety of nonprofits that people are starting, where you have like little consolidation. You have this specific central meaning that people are like forced into doing volunteering for established organizations, which is probably beneficial. Also extend that like young people can still work for these organizations. It provides the young mind influence. On to weighing. Judge, the weighing mechanism for this round is net benefit, looking at the greatest amount of good for the greatest amount of people. We tell you the specific argument you're going to be voting on is displacing people, and if you don't buy that, you're going to be voting on the fact that it is uncontested that there is some risk that starting college that we have a chance of reducing inequality in college admissions. That risk is probably really, really key because this is a cyclic issue, right? Inequality in college admissions is a cyclic issue that is not being addressed. It is not being talked about, and we are fundamentally the only side that attempts to solve for it. Our opponents only make defensive responses to it. They do nothing offensive. It probably means you're going to be voting on this. Secondly, yeah.
We wouldn't even a 0.1% chance we're stopping the poverty cycle.
If we win even a 0.001% chance we're stopping the poverty cycle, probably a specific reason as to why you're going to be voting for the affirmation, because we are the only team with any attempt to solve, right, the college admissions inequality. In terms of displacing nonprofits, the reason you're going to be voting for this, and the reason you're preferring this, over a lot of the offense that the negation gives is because it has this background, because it's established, and because it doesn't have the risk of being shut down, right? That is something that our opponents don't contest. There's still the risk. The risk exists, and this risk is probably a reason as to why you cannot be voting for the negative. Because of these reasons, I strongly urge an affirmation vote. Thank you.
Cool. So I think we'll both, Artem, it works for you. I think we can both make our decisions and then pop and give feedback once we submit our ballots.
Okay, well, I have made my decision.
Yeah, it looks like we're both in. Artem, do you want to start?
Sure. Are all the teams? Yeah, all the teams are here. So great work to both teams. For me, this was a close round. I ended up voting for the op from Stuyvesant, but as a low point win. I'll make a few general comments. I think this round was very difficult for me to flow because neither team really numbered any of their subpoints and made any attempt to signpost, but especially this is true for the second speaker from the op, Regal, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Please tell me where you are on the flow, otherwise I'll lose a lot of your arguments. A couple notes on the original Gov case. These are minor and didn't really impact the round consideration for me. If you're paying $10,000 to register a nonprofit, you're getting ripped off. You can do it for about $300 or so. Now, $300 could still be unaffordable for low-income students, so the general argument stands, but I think your numbers are way off. Also, charities are corporations, so I don't think you can distinguish between corporations and charities. Charities are just nonprofit corporations. Anyway, how do I evaluate the round? I think that both teams in the rebuttal focus too much on extending points and don't focus sufficiently on weighing. In particular, there's two broad categories of impacts in the round for me. One has to deal with college admissions equity, and another one has to deal with the impact of these charities on the communities where they're located. And I think that if either team made a conscious decision to say one of these things is more important than the other and then concentrate on winning that impact, that would make the round a lot cleaner. I don't think the op really went for either of these specifically. The Gov, I also probably didn't really try to collapse on it, but I did get an articulation from the Gov rebuttal that something like, even if there is a 0.1% of reducing cycle of poverty, that wins the round, or something along those lines. So that was the closest that I got to the weighing between those two categories of impacts. So I said, okay, let me set aside college admissions equity and see who is winning the cycle of poverty reduction. And presumably that means who is creating better charities. Now, there's two ways that we can access that, right? Actually, three. So first of all, Gov makes an argument that there is a trade-off between established charities and student charities in a world where there is only a certain amount of money people are willing to donate. If they donate to one, they won't donate to the other. Okay, that's fine. That's a good argument. I was actually pretty close to voting on it. But in order for you to win that argument, you then have to follow through and say there's a trade-off, and also established charities are better than student charities. And for that, I really get arguments from both sides that are not compared. So that's kind of a wash for me. I have arguments from the gov that says established charities are better because they're stable. Like, that's good. But then the op says, actually, student charities are better because students are more innovative and they know their communities better. I'm like, okay, well, I don't know how to really evaluate between those two arguments because they're not compared or weighed between one another. Then the next argument is about stability. Gov really goes hard for stability, and it says that these charities will be abandoned. That's a good argument. The problem is OP makes a response that if students care about college admissions, then once the student moves on to college, like a younger student would just take over the leadership of that nonprofit because they also want college admissions. That's not really responded to. And also, and even more devastating for the gov, OP makes a turn that if you just out of the blue say, hey, we stop considering charities that you've developed, then all the ones that are currently in existence will just get abandoned even before the students get to college. And that, I think, turns the stability argument. There is also the argument that the op makes that even if the current student charities don't really do much, at least the student learned the value of charity. And even if originally they did it for college admissions, maybe eventually they will learn to love it for real. And as an adult, maybe they'll donate to charities such as that. So I think that might also access some cycle of poverty impacts. And overall, I think the op is just stronger on the cycle of poverty arguments, which is why if I were gov, I would have collapsed to the admissions equity, where I think gov is stronger. But I don't think you made that call in the rebuttal. So that's all my comments.
Okay, I will start. I also voted up. A lot of my thinking is very similar, so I kind of want to get into where I differed a little bit because I don't want to repeat Artem's very good points. So I definitely agree so I thought of it around sort of two areas. I hear the arguments about benefit to community and also the equity. Equity in college admissions, I should say. Similar to Artem said, I think I don't hear the arguments super well weighed against each other in terms of established charities versus new charities. Don't need to go into that again. But what I do hear out of op that I think go pretty poorly responded to by gov are two areas that I think are sort of orthogonal to how effective the charities actually are in the moment. So I hear that you're teaching good skills. So creating a charity is uniquely good, and that teaches good skills, and it's good to reward those people who do that with good education so that they can go further use those skills in the workplace whenever they do. And then I think what's even more important than that is this perception that colleges don't care about charity. So I think this is very clearly not what gov is saying. I think gov makes the point that colleges aren't saying that, hey, we don't care about charity at all, and volunteering for existing charities is still a good thing from an admissions perspective. But I think op does a good job of showing that some of that nuance is going to get lost. And if Yale tomorrow says we don't care if we start a charity, the perception is going to be, hey, you don't, charity doesn't matter anymore, so I'm going to focus on other things. So basically at the end of the round, I'm kind of inclined to think that high school students starting charities for self-interested reasons is maybe a little bit bad. I do think arguments of stability are pretty clear, but I don't think that they're weighed enough against each other for me to firmly decide on that. And I think those two areas I issued were kind of they're sort of orthogonal to the net benefits stuff. There is enough to win this, if a little narrowly, for op. So then on the second issue, inequality in the college admissions process, I think this is a much cleaner op win. Because the arguments that I hear, I think straight from LOC, but definitely more fully developed in MOC, are about how if you stop emphasizing starting charities, it's not like students who want to go to Harvard and Yale who would have started charities are just going to vibe in their free time. Instead, they're going to do other things because they still want to compete. So they're going to start taking more SAT prep classes or cheating harder or whatever, or any number of things that they can do. And I think that the point is well made that all of these things are even more easily gameable than starting charities. So at that point, I think that of the two issues in the round, both are at least slight op wins, but I think this is a clean op win on inequality. And I think I was able to vote off both. But yeah, I would definitely echo the comments earlier that I think my advice for both sides is that an old debate coach I had used to call arguments like ships passing in the night. And I think that happened a lot. These arguments weren't put into direct contention with each other. And I think if either team was able to say, they say this, we say this, here's why the impact from what we say is stronger, I think would have won, because this was not like this wasn't like a devastating win by either side. Yeah, that's my thinking.
Well, if any debaters have any questions for us, go for it.
Yeah, I had one question, unless anyone else wants to go first. Yeah, I was just wondering, given that the weighing that I did about the 0.01% was in regards to the admissions advantages, how did you evaluate the weighing of like a decreasing poverty cycle by decreasing income inequality in terms of admissions?
I mean, I can start. I think that I didn't buy that. I guess what I say. Yeah. So the way I read that argument was like, if there's a tiny chance that Gov accesses the benefits of fighting the poverty cycle, I should vote F. So like, if I accept that as the mechanism under which I should judge the round, I'm still going to vote up, because I hear that anything. I think Gov is going to only contribute more to this poverty cycle because it is more easy to game test scores or grades or debate club than charities. So I think it's a fine weighing mechanism, and it was helpful in that it was kind of the only way I hear, or at least the most clearly articulated way I could evaluate the round. But I still think under that I vote up. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
I'm not sure I understood the question.
Yeah, let me try and rephrase it. So you were talking about how like the most of the weighing that you predicated the second advantage of like nonprofits being beneficial, and like that was kind of like you had these like two impact groups. You were like, given this weighing, you used it to narrow out the scope of the debate to just like creating a better nonprofit. I was just wondering, given that our first advantage is inequalities and like college admissions, how did you evaluate that, given that it links into the poverty cycle that this weighing mechanism talks about? Did that help, or do you want me to try again?
Okay, so I think you're trying to say that through the inequalities in college admissions, you're controlling the internal link to cycle of poverty. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Yeah, because
okay.
that's the initial application that I use this weighing in. So I'm just wondering how you would evaluate it.
Sure. Okay. I think some of that nuance might have been lost on me because it wasn't clearly articulated. My takeaway from your speech was cycle of poverty is the biggest impact. And then I thought of arguments that would most directly address cycle of poverty, and it seemed like a charity that tries to help poor people is the cleanest thing that accesses that in the most straightforward link chain. I think you could have the rebuttal say, look, there are two major categories of impacts in this round. One of them is about the quality of charities, and the other one is about college admissions. Both of them impact out to poverty, but because these charities are mostly kind of useless and low impact anyway, the one that impacts out to poverty more is college admissions. If poor people can't get into college, then they will stay poor forever. And that's the stronger link to poverty. And then here is why we win on that really hard. I think if that happened, actually, I would agree with Nick. Now that I think about it, OP actually did also have a lot of strong arguments on the admissions equity too. So I would have to think about that harder. But since that's not really the articulation I got, I didn't really think about admissions equity that much anyway.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Good luck, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Good luck, you guys.
Good luck, guys. Have a good one.